On Sunday, the NHL released the most recent 50 goal scorers per franchise. Now, the Hurricanes haven't had a 50 goal scorer since relocation. However, it did make me think, what is the top 10 most goals in a season in Hurricanes history since relocation? Well, we'll talk about all of that here on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I am the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hawkers, also the co-host of the Surgecast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. And on today's show, like I said, we're going to be talking about 50 goal scorers and mainly looking overall, starting on the show with, looking at 50 goal scorers for the NHL per the franchises and who is the most recent in terms of Hurricanes Whalers history. Then going to look at the top 10 best goal scoring seasons for the Hurricanes since relocation in 1997-98 until currently. And then finally going to wrap up the show with who has the best chance to be the first 50 goal scorer in Hurricanes history. But before we jump into all of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, like I said, the NHL on Sunday or Saturday/Sunday over the weekend released their most recent 50 goal scorers by franchise. All that to be said, there are some teams that haven't had a 50 goal scorer recently in franchise history. And surprisingly, New Jersey Devils haven't had one. Also, the Columbus Blue Jackets, the Minnesota Wild, Nashville Predators, obviously Seattle Kraken, the Utah Mammoth, as they're very, very new, and also the Vegas Golden Knights. So there are about 6 teams right now that have, there's 7 teams right now that have not had a 50 goal scorer. Now, looking at this list overall, of course, Corey Perry with the Ducks in 2010-11, David Pastrnak 22-23, other notable names, Pat LaFontaine and Alexander Mogilny both did in the 92-93 season, Jeremy Roenick in 92-93, of course, one of the more recent-ish guys to pull this feat off were Nathan MacKinnon in 23-24 and Austin Matthews for the Maple Leafs, and of course, Braden Point did it in 22-23. Alex Ovechkin go back to the 21-22 season. And there was also Sam Reinhart in 23-24, and then this past year in 24-25, Leon Draisaitl. And of course, and one more quick notable double name guys, Sergei Fedorov, Ray Shepard in 93-94 for the Red Wings, and then Brett Hull, Brendan Shanahan of the 93-94 St. Louis Blues. Now, in terms of the Carolina Hurricanes Whalers franchise, they do have a recent 50 goal scorer. It is Blaine Stoughton. However, that is with the Hartford Whalers, and that is the only team on this graphic that the NHL shared where it's the Hurricanes having a player doing it for a team that they relocated from. That's because Blaine Stoughton did in the 1981-82 season with the Whalers. I'll also rephrase, Ilya Kovalchuk did it for the Jets, which was then the Atlanta Thrashers in 07-08. Sorry, very small print. So there are 2 franchises that have guys who have done it, but is with the former team that were in a city before they moved to the current one. So yes, the last time a Carolina Hurricane Whaler had a 50-goal season was back in the 81-82 from Blaine Stoughton. That's just the name of the game now, unfortunately, when it comes to that, where as of now, the Hurricanes since relocation haven't had a 50-goal scorer. They've had a couple guys hit the range of, having 40-goal seasons and getting, moderately close to that number. Of course, we'll talk about that in segment 2. But I will say they've had 3 40 goal scorers at least and a bunch of 30-plus goal scorers, but no 50s. That's kind of where you're at right now with the Carolina Hurricanes. But overall, there is a good number of guys in the NHL that have had 50-goal seasons, and we've seen it recently that there is a lot of guys who've done it in the last couple of seasons. Like I said, Sam Reinhart, Leon Draisaitl, who did it, this past season with the Oilers, Matthews, McKinnon, even Chris Kreider for the Rangers in the 21-22 season. David Pastrnak in 22-23. It's also very interesting, too, when you look at teams with guys who've done it in the same year together. Like I said, LaFontaine and Mogilny for the Sabres back in 1993. Then that following season, Fedorov and Shepherd with the Red Wings. And then you look back, all the way to 93, 94, that same year as the Red Wings guys did it. That was Hall and Brendan Shanahan, which is pretty funny to think about, too, when you think of when you hear Hall and Shanahan. And the fact that it wasn't long until they joined that same team that had, guys like Fedorov and Shepherd and all of them. So, and even if you look back to other teams too, how about you look at Luc Robitaille in 92-93, the Canadians haven't had one since 89-90, and that's Stefan Rischer. That's kind of it in terms of them. And the oldest one on this entire list is the Hurricanes, the 81-82 season. And of course, like I said, that's when it was still the Whalers and it was Staunton. Now, at least they're not the 7 teams that have never had a 50-goal score, but to be fair, 6 of those teams were 2000 or later. So within the last 25 years, they haven't had a 50-goal score. And that makes sense when you look at just the trajectories of a lot of those teams. Columbus, Minnesota, Nashville, Seattle, Utah, and Vegas. Utah was a relocated team from the Arizona Coyotes. Vegas and Seattle were the most recent expansion teams. And you look back at the other 3 expansion teams around that 99, 98, 99, 2000 era of Preds, Minnesota, Columbus. Those guys haven't been around long enough like the other, 3 teams. But it is very interesting, though, we look at the New Jersey Devils and that out of their iterations of being like the Colorado Rockies, the Cleveland Barons, and the Oakland Golden Seals, that whole saga of that team just bouncing around to a million different areas, that even in New Jersey, they've never had a 50-goal scorer and they've won cups. So that's kind of the very interesting part when you look at this overall list of teams that have had 50-goal scorers, where either it's a previous team that moved to a new city and so holds that team's franchise numbers, or even looking at the 7 teams that have never done it, and 6 of them have been recently since, the late 80s, early 2000s, even the most recent 2020, recent pre-2020 teams or teams that were formed in the 2020s. Outside of the New Jersey Devils, who've just never done it, and they've been relocated multiple times, but in that history, never done it once. But with Carolina, at least they got one. Now, of course, like I said, that's back to their Hartford days in the early 80s, and it hasn't really been done since. But at least for the team that's currently right now in Carolina, they have had some guys that scored 40-goal seasons. One of them got pretty close to 45. A lot of lower to upper 30s as well, and a lot of them has come from more of the recent guys. And of course, we'll talk about more about that here in segment 2. But you see that the 50-goal trend is still relatively new as well. It's not just you're looking back at the 80s and 90s NHL where there were some years where guys were just popping off left and right, scoring 50-goal seasons and stuff like that. It's interesting too that it's just some of the names you see on this list and the fact that you would think there'd be more prominent names, but have been kind of knocked off, like Wayne Gretzky. Oilers got that taken care of with Draisaitl. He never did it with the King. Of course, Luc Robitaille did it in 1993. But one name I've always thought was very awesome to see on this list still is the fact that Mike Modano was the last Dallas Stars to do it in 93 and 94. But for the Hurricanes, like I said, they haven't had a 50-goal scorer, but they've had 40-goal scorers and a bunch of 30-goal scorers. All that to say, What are the top 10 best goal scoring seasons for the Hurricanes since relocation from Hartford? Well, stick around and we'll go over that top 10 list here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. Just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you really need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. And, there's a lot of people that have been in tight spots where you needed to hire someone like pretty much yesterday. There's pressure on and every day without the right person is just a big setback. And that's exactly what Indeed's sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. So now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/locked-on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you really need. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked on Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, like I said, we talked about the 50 goal scorers kind of broadly in terms of the entire NHL so far. Of course, we know the last Hurricane Whaler history player to do it was back in 81-82. So that got me thinking. I know in terms of the fact that I made a post earlier on Sunday when I initially saw that list saying, hey, Eric Staal was the closest guy to get to 50. He had 45 goals back in the Cup winning season of 05-06. So that made me start to think, what other seasons did guys have the most goals? What would a top 10 list look like of the best goal scoring seasons for the Carolina Hurricanes since relocation in 97, 98 to now this upcoming 25-26 season? So I went back, look through all the years, when the Hurricanes moved to Raleigh up until this past season of 24-25, look and saw who were the best ones, looked at, who had the most goals that season, made a list. And then after, when a certain guy made it out of the top 10, had to kind of knock him off. But there's guys like Justin Williams, Jeff O'Neill, right when a lot of those guys had 33, 32, 31, 30 goals and stuff like that. But here is the top 10 goal scoring list for goals in a season for the Carolina Hurricanes since relocation. And I find this very interesting with the fact there's a lot of current names. And you'd be surprised if some guys that, you might be like, I didn't realize he scored that many. So number 10, we're going to go from 10 to 1. Number 10, Seth Jarvis. This past season had 33 goals, which is, back in the 23-24 season, had 33 goals, which is pretty awesome to think the fact that even this past season he had 32. So just a little short of this top 10 list. But Seth Jarvis did have 33 goals in the 23-24 season. So right before he got his new contract, he had a very massive season getting 33 and just making it into the top 10. Of course, he did just beat out Justin Williams. Now, coming in at number 9 and number 8, Sebastian Aho did the same goal number twice in actually back-to-back seasons, the 22-23 and the 23-24 season. So the same year that Seth Jarvis had his 33 goals, he had 36, and he did it the season before as well. So in a span of 2 seasons, Sebastian Aho had back-to-back 36-goal seasons for 72 goals over those 2 years, which is really awesome to see for the fact that Sebastian Aho scored the same amount of goals in back-to-back years. Now, this one might be surprising for some people, and that this was like a couple seasons right before the start of the Brendan Moore era Hurricanes. And the fact that it was Jeff Skinner comes in at number 7 with a 37-goal season in the 16-17 season. So right before, a couple seasons before, Rod Brendan Moore took over, Jeff Skinner and the previous coach's regime, not going to talk about the guy, who was the head coach at the time, but Jeff Skinner did have 37 goals, which led the team that year back in 16-17. So good job for Jeff Skinner. He actually made the list a couple times, but didn't really make the top 10, but he was definitely in, I would say, the top 20 of guys scoring, a bunch of goals, at least 30 goals or more, since relocation. So Skinner comes in at number 7 with 37 goals. At number 6, he comes up once again. He comes up a lot in this list. Sebastian Aho, 37 goals in the 21-22 season. So in 3 straight seasons, he had 37, 36, and then 36. Not a bad stretch for Fishy, being able to go from the 21-22 to the 23-24 season, scoring at least 36 goals in back-to-back seasons. Coming in at number 5, Eric Stahl, 38 goals in the 07-08 season. So a couple years after his monster year in 05-06, he comes back with a 38-goal season, which, the season after that wasn't really the greatest for the Hurricanes overall, but the fact that you had Eric Stahl jump back and put himself in a good spot, getting up to number 38. And then his first time, this is where Sebastian Aho really started kicking into gear. And this was, even before his 37 and 36 goal seasons, he had a 38 goal season himself, dating back to the 2019-2020 season. He had, like I said, 38 goals, tying him with Eric Stahl in terms of, fourth at the time. But really cool to see that Sebastian Aho had 38 goals, and then not that long after, had a season where he didn't really get to that mark, but then followed up with a 37 and back-to-back 36s. Eric Stahl coming in at number 3 with a 40-goal season in 08-09. So he followed up his 38-goal season in 07-08 with a monster 40-goal season to get into the 40-goal mark for the second time in his career, and had 38 or more in back-to-back games. So coming in with the bronze medal of terms of top 10 goals in a season, Eric Stahl with 40 in 08-09. Now, this next guy, like I said, he did come up with this list a couple times with a bunch of 30-goal seasons, but Jeff O'Neill, 41 goals in the 2000-2001 season. And while, it's kind of, a lot of people, the O-Dog is not fond of Carolina very much, from just his commentary. He did have some big years in Carolina. Like I said, that's even before they made their first cup run, at the turn of the century. Like I said, in 2000, 2001, 41 goals for Jeff O'Neill, getting that silver medal in terms of the best goals in a season. And of course, I kind of mentioned at the start of the segment, but Eric Stahl, 45 goals in the cup winning season of 05-06. So, yeah, Eric Stahl comes in at 5th on this list at 38, 3rd at 40, and then, of course, leads the way with 45 goals in 05-06. So that is your top 10 goals in a season. Eric Stahl at 45, Jeff O'Neill with 41, Stahl again with 40, Sebastian Aho with 38, tying with Eric Stahl's 38, and then Aho with 37, Skinner with 37. Then, of course, Sebastian Aho comes in at 8th and 9th with back-to-back 36-goal seasons. And then Seth Jarvis rounds out the whole list at 10 with 33. And, of course, his honorable mentions of Justin Williams at 33, Ray Whitney had 32, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of 30s, 31s and 30s and stuff like that. And Sammy Kapanen had some pretty good seasons as well for the Hurricanes in his heyday. But that is your top 10 list. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Was there a surprising name you didn't think had that many goals in the season? Like I said, Jeff Skinner at 37 in the 16-17 season. And it's very surprising for a lot of people. Maybe you don't realize that Skinner had that many goals, or maybe you kind of forgot, or you knew, and it's just like, you didn't, looking at a top 10 list, it's like kind of surprising that, Skinner has himself in 7th there. If some people didn't think of it, but of course, Aho and Stahl make this list a ton in terms of this top 10. Of course, like I said, Seth Jarvis, not that long ago, makes the top 10 with 33 goals. And then, of course, Jeff O'Neill's 41 in the 2000-2001 season. And like I said, Eric Stahl coming in at 45. The closest player in a single season to get to 50 goals was at 05-06 season for Stahl. So that's kind of your top 10 list. And just in general speaking, like I said, you've had 3 40-goal seasons for the Hurricanes. Eric Stahl has 2 of them with 45 and 40 respectively. O'Neill's 41, and then a bunch of 30s, 2 38s, couple 37s, couple 36s, and then you round out with 33. So overall, a nice spread when it comes to your top 10 goals in a season. And I will say, there were a couple of names that were very surprising who led the Hurricanes in goal scoring in one particular season wasn't near the 30 mark, but the fact that Yuri Tlusi in one season led the Carolina Hurricanes in goal scoring, and even it was the right before the Cup season, Joseph Vasicek also led the team with 19 goals. Think about that. The late great Joseph, well, the late Joseph Vasicek, who was also great when he did play for the Hurricanes in the small role that he had, did lead the team 1 year in goal scoring. So there's some interesting tidbits there. All that to say, is there a player right now currently on the roster that has a shot of being the first 50 goal scorer for the Hurricanes since relocation? Well, stick around. We'll talk about that here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned on the beach. It's easy to use with fast to pay out and makes even the regular season games feel like must-watch events, whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right in the ninth inning. FanDuel makes it feel like you are part of the action. So if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can get just $5 and get $150 in bonus. It's if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So, we talked about league-wide 50 goal scorers. We talked about the top 10 goals in a regular season for the Carolina Hurricanes since relocation. But all of that to say, who currently right now on the Hurricanes, maybe there could be a future Hurricane coming up really soon, has the best chance to score 50 goals in a season to be the first ever Hurricane to pull it off? And like I said, you hear the list and you see that Sebastian Aho has gotten close to 40 a couple times. Like I said, he had 38 back in 2019-20, and then he also had it 37, and then back-to-back seasons with 36. 22, 23, 23, 24. He hasn't 40 yet. He has been pretty close before. Of course, is there to say that he can get 40? I think he can get 40. And I think with where the lineup is currently right now, if you have Ehlers and Jarvis or Svechnikov and Ehlers on either one of his sides, and if he gets a little bit more selfish and shoots the puck more in terms of not looking for that pass, I think Aho is one of those guys that could have a 50-goal season. Like I say, he's been close to 40 a couple times. And I think the fact that the Hurricanes and even Ron Brennamore are kind of looking to tweak some of the system where it's like, hey, we want you to play a certain way, but if you have the shot, go for it. Be a little bit more selfish. Don't look for the pass. Make that shot. And I think if the confidence is back there for Fishy to know, he doesn't have to look for the perfect pass. He can actually shoot the puck if he has the lane. I think he's one of those guys to do it. And I would say another guy that has a really good chance is Seth Jarvis. Back in 23-24, he had 33 goals. This past season, he had 32, which led the team. So he's had back-to-back 30-goal seasons in just his third and fourth season in the NHL. And he's only 23. So Seth Jarvis has a bunch of more time to get it done and plays, he's a goal scorer. And I think if he gets more opportunities, maybe gets fully healthy a little bit too, and, sticks with a certain line for a whole season where they're going back from first to third to second, back to first, back to third again. I think if you give Jarvis a more consistent line mates and just, hey, we're going to stick you on this line for the whole season, do your thing, I think Jarvis is another guy who could do it. I think Fishy and looking at Aho and Jarvis, those are the two guys to me that have currently the best chance to score 50 goals in a season. Nikolai Ehlers, he hasn't really hit 30 goals in his career yet. I don't think he's ever going to get to that 50 mark. I think you might see mid-30s for him, which is still pretty good too. Andrei Svechnikov hasn't really had a 30-goal season, that would really make you feel like he can get to 50 or even 40. So maybe Svechnikov, you're looking for a big dark horse guy that could possibly do it. Jackson Blick's pretty young, had 17 goals in his rookie season. If he gets 25 in his sophomore year, I think that's a trajectory for him at some point to hit 50. Other than that, the best pure goal scorer the Hurricanes have in their system is Bradley Nadeau, because just in his first pro season in the American Hockey League with the Wolves this past season, he had over 30 goals. And he joins a very small list of guys to hit 30 goals in a season before they even hit 21. Of course, that's the American Hockey League, and that's completely different from what the guys do in the NHL. But if you're looking at a pure goal scorer who might have a chance, like way down the road, like I could probably project this guy to maybe do it if his goal scoring translates from the American to the National Hockey League, and if he progressively gets to that number. I think your biggest long shot, not a dark horse like Svechnikov is, where I think he could potentially do it if everything goes right. I think Svech is a dark horse. If you're talking long shot, maybe this could happen, but it will have to take like however many seasons down the road. Can it translate? Can it do all of this? I think Bradley Nadeau is that guy with just his pure goal scoring and just his pure shot. For me, he is the long shot guy to possibly do it. Past that, I don't know. I don't know any other guys right now in the AHL that have that foresight to maybe get to that number one day. There's a lot of guys who just got recently drafted that haven't even played, in the American Hockey League yet. The highest is the USHL in college and even some leagues in Europe. So I would say as of right now on the Hurricanes, there's two names that I think are bona fide guys who could hit 50 goals if they play a little bit more of a selfish hockey and if they stick with their line all season. And I think if they have just an unreal start to the season and carry it through, even if it takes 82 games to hit 50 goals, because no one's going to pull a Wayne Gretzky and get 50 and 39. It's impossible these days. But if there's a guy who could take an 82-game schedule and hit 50 goals, I think right now it's Aho and Jarvis. I think those are the two guys right now that could hit 50 goals in the season. Dark horse, Andrei Svechnikov, if everything goes right and he just gets on an absolute tear as well. He's not someone who I would say I'm 100% confident could do it, but I think he's a guy that might do it if everything goes his way. And then the one very long shot down the road, like this guy has the stuff. Will it just translate from what he's done in the BCHL, NCAA, the American Hockey League in his first pro season? Can that translate to the NHL? Could it happen down the road? Is Bradley Nadeau. Those are kind of the four guys in terms of tiers that I would say would be hitting 50 goals in a season. But let me know what you think in the comments if you're on YouTube, or if you want to hit me up on social media at OneSureZach, or of course LO_Hurricanes for the podcast. Let me know who you think has the best shot of scoring 50 goals in a season for the Carolina Hurricanes. For me, like I said, it's Aho and Jarvis are kind of like the two guys who I think I feel 100% confident could do it if things go their way. And of course, with the long shots in the dark horse as well. So let me know in the comments, or let me know in socials, who do you think could be the first 50 goal scorer in Hurricanes history since relocation from Hartford? But until we figure that out, this will be a limited Locked on Hurricanes. Thanks for making your first listen. Your second listen, why don't you go check out the Locked on NHL podcast, where there is no off season. We'll be bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most, with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneSureZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky, the Zachary Martin, where I do have link trees in my bios, where you can find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. If you want to check out my other podcast, it's the Search Cast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, we're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever to listen to your podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and review, because I might just read it on the show. for YouTube. It's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe. Hit the bell notifications so you don't miss a show. Hit the thumbs up so let me know if you like the show as well. Share with all their Caniacs so they become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Monday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.